Welcome to this evening's exclusive Value the Markets webinar with Maurice Treacy, Director of Open Orphan. Open Orphan is a pharmacological services company with a very exciting business model that came to AIM in summer 2018 via reverse takeover. Maurice is co-founder of the company and its Chief Commercial Officer. Tonight will be giving us an abridged overview of his presentation, which you can see on the screen, and we'll then be taking questions from shareholders at the end of the presentation. As you can see in the bottom right of the screen in front of you, there's a chat window where you can type your messages. If you have any questions for Maurice about the company, about its direction, its future plans, please feel free to write those in the bottom right, and those will be passed through via our moderator. So I'll now hand over to Maurice, who will provide us with his presentation. So Maurice, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Ben, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for your time and for dialing into listening to the Open Orphan update. I will give an abridged update, and we have a presentation in front of you that obviously I'll scroll through. Obviously, the natural disclaimer exists that there's risks associated with any investment, and that includes investment into Open Orphan. But in the context of saying that, hopefully I'll convince you that there's a really nice opportunity here. So slide one, I guess, is really an introduction to Open Orphan. Before I get into that, what I would like to do is really explain to people what orphan products are, because there is a little bit of confusion about what orphan products are. And really, it's quite simple. They are a designation given to therapeutic products that are used to treat rare disease or rare disease patients, I should say. So it's a simple designation. It's for those products that are used to treat rare disease, and rare diseases are defined as affecting 1 in 2,000 people or less, and that's a European definition. In the US, it's slightly different definition of a market of less than 200,000 people in the US. But when you work it all out, it's effectively the same, 1 in 2,000 people. So these are considered rare diseases. However, rare is not rare. Rare diseases are 300 million people worldwide, 30 million people in Europe, and there's about 6,000 to 7,000 different types of rare diseases. So it is a large population of people who are affected with the rare diseases. As a result, it's a very big market. While fragmented, it is hugely valuable. So that's kind of a little bit of an introduction to what orphan products are, and I want everyone to be clear on that. A little bit about the company. We are an AIM and Euronext listed pharma company. Our ticker is ORF, ORPH. Have a market cap of about 17 to 18 million currently, based on the share price fluctuating. We're at 6.45 today. We did IPO in June of this year, and that was a reverse takeover of Venn Life Sciences. And in the process of doing that, we did raise 4.5 million fresh equity into the combined entity from institutional London-based investors. I'll talk to you as we go through this as the experienced management team that have a track record of building really successful companies. The management are really committed to this company. We own about 35% of the company. We're locked in for 3 years from the IPO, so we're not going anywhere other than through an acquisition. So that's actually a key commitment and drive for the management. Just in the context of Venn, and we had our interim statements just at the end of September. Venn had 14.5 million in sales up to the end of 2018. And our strategy going forward is that we will right-size Venn, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to do that. We also will bolt on a pharma services company across Europe that will really kind of increase the scale of our target turnover to be 50 million in the next 2 years. And by doing that, we will really become noticeable to the larger players in this high profit, high growth area. Operating profits in the first half of next year, we hope to be profitable, and that's kind of a real turnaround of Venn. And we will also, which I will get into, upsell, or we will we will deliver to the market as part of Open Orphan 2 unique digital platforms. The first one of those, which I'll give a lot of time this evening to, is the development of a genomic health database. It's a database that will really corral rare disease patients' genomic and health data information. This you would have seen an RNS from us on the middle of October in relation to the final polish we're putting to that database to really make it unique in what it can do from a safety perspective and anonymization of patients' records. And we're doing this by both getting pharma companies on board to drive the database as well as patient advocacy groups. And I'll get into that in the next few slides. But we are driving a hugely valuable database that will be significant to the company going forward. We have in Venn, there are 30 very significant top-end pharma companies that are existing customers and are repeat customers. So that's very exciting for growing the business organically as well. And then finally, we're so confident in this marketplace that we believe we will have a very significant story and will deliver back to shareholders, existing and hopefully new shareholders that come on within the next 2 years, significant dividends, and we have a clearly defined exit strategy. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the leadership. So Cathal Friel is our CEO, and Cathal's co-founder together with myself and Brendan Buckley. Cathal has been in this as a shareholder, as a broker, a broker for most of his existence. He has created many companies on AIM. He's done several reverse takeovers in AIM. The one that's most exciting right now is with Amrit Pharma. It is an orphan drug company that's focused on dermatitis, rare disease, and it is valued currently at about 300 million. Companies an exciting venture. He was also a founder and chairman of Fastnet Oil and Gas, which was listed in 2012, raised about 50 million on AIM. Unfortunately, didn't do so well after the oil price went down, but again was a reverse takeover into Amrit Pharma. So again, a good story made even more successful, and was a director of Marion Stockbrokers, which was acquired for 80 million in 2006. Brendan Buckley, if I skip to Brendan is a clinician, has worked all his life in both hospitals, but then also in the clinical trials space. He was a chief medical officer of Icon, a publicly listed Crow that's valued at about 8 billion from 2013 to 17. That was following his successful sale into that business of Firecrest, a digital engagement platform used in clinical trials. He's also served on the executive leadership team of Icon and is very used to M&A and as doing a diligence and assessment of new target companies. Is very critical in our bolt-on acquisition strategy that we outlined to the market when we went public. He's 30 years experience and was one of the key drivers of the EMA's orphan drug medicinal products protocols in 2000 to 2003. So there's Cathal, who understands the financial part of the business. There's Brendan, who understands the clinical and orphan drug space. And me, I'm an entrepreneur by founding. This is my third startup. The most recent one was Genomics Medicine Ireland, which was recently acquired by Wuxi Nextcode for an undisclosed sum, but it was following a 400 million Series B investment into the company. I have significant C-level experience, reputation in startups, R&D investment, have many products on the market based on what I've done in the pharma sector, many patents. So I think between Cathal, myself, and Brendan, we have the key expertise to really drive the business that we're operating in the orphan drug space. So a little bit about the orphan drug space. It is the fastest growing segment of the drug market. It's growing at twice the rate of any other products. And for example, last year, the FDA, the regulatory authority in the US, 58% of the products it approved were orphan products. So you might ask, where did this come from? And I guess this came from legislation that was put in place in the US and in Europe, which really incentivized companies to really put research and time and scientific expertise into the development of products for rare diseases. So this is where the orphan drug legislation came from. It's been in place for about 20 years, and it's now that we're beginning to see the benefits of that legislation. This slide really goes to some of the kind of conditions that have arisen as a result of those incentives. So, for example, there's 2,500 2,000 products in development, in clinical evaluation in various companies across the globe that have been designated orphan. So that's our pipeline of products we will be looking to garner. The trial sizes, the clinical trial sizes you put in place for these products is smaller than you would for non-orphan products. Also, you get expedited review from the EMA and from the FDA, and you get a lot of the costs and you incur in developing these products is tax deductible. Huge consulting market around the whole orphan product that is hugely valuable and of which we are part. As I said, there's 30 million people that are affected by rare diseases in Europe alone, and the price you can charge for these products is hugely valuable. So it's about 4.5 times what you can get for non-orphan products, and that's part of the legislation, and it also offsets the size of these markets. It's actively growing at 8.8 compound annual growth rate, and that's forecasted for next year. So it really is an active product, active growth segment market. What I will also say is that there's a huge other market opportunity here, that in the US, there are over 500 orphan drug products on the market. They're approved, they're on the market, they've been demonstrated to be safe. In Europe, there's only 180. So that disparity of the availability of orphan products in the US, in Europe compared to the US, is really an opportunity also for Open Orphan. We are in discussions with the companies that own these products, mainly American companies, and we will be the pan-European consulting house to bring their products to the European market. You may ask the question, why are those products not in Europe? And the main reason why they're not in Europe is because reimbursement in Europe is quite complex, yet we have the expertise to navigate those reimbursement processes across the major European markets of the UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. So it really is a growth market and opportunity for us in both the consulting part of the business, but then also the new orphan products coming down the line for the genomic database, new products from these companies. So if I go back to the original business model, it's combining high margin pharma services that I talked about just now, which is a digital AI enabled, artificial intelligence enabled data offering of the genomic health database. I won't talk so much about the virtual rep, which is just a digital engagement platform for new orphan products coming to Europe that we will launch later next year. But fundamentally, we have the orphan drug services. That is really the activities that were highlighted by Venn when we did the reverse takeover. And again, we will correct Venn, right size Venn, make it fit for purpose, and really grow this side of the business through bolt-on strategic acquisitions. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I will then mainly talk about the genomic health database, and I'll mention a little bit the virtual rep database. So, and I talked a little bit about this. An abbreviated version of this is Venn was undercapitalized. It was staff utilization was really bad. It was loss making. Despite all that, it had a really significant cadre of really high-end companies from Europe and North America, about 30 repeat customers that kept coming back, and we're growing on this, and most of them were in the orphan space. It was undervalued. We acquired Venn for 4 million, despite revenues of 4.5 million in 2018, as previously mentioned. Repeat customers said, strong customer base, and in the orphan space. So the goal here is to recapitalize. We did that with the 4.5 million institutional investors we got in June of this year. We're restructuring Venn. We're correcting it from a size perspective, from a staff utilization perspective, and from a logistics property perspective. So everything we're doing is really going to impact Venn's ongoing activities and growth activities, as well as being profitable in the first half of next year, which we demonstrated to the market, we declared to the market. And we hope to re-rate as a result of that. As we grow revenues in this company through bolt-on acquisitions, and we get above the 30 million mark, we will become obvious to the big players in this market, which the Parexels, IQVIAs of this world, and really we hope to be re-rated at 2.5 to 3 times sales, which is what is normal in this segment, and is where our peers are. So that's the hope here. And we will be launching the additional services of the activities, the the digital health engagement platforms. So if I have a little bit of issue with the scroller here. So bolt-on acquisitions, I've talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it, but we are aiming to get to 30 million quite quickly. Just in terms of an update, and I know that Cathal has talked to you about this. We had told the market that we should declare to the marketplace that we are in a new acquisition by the end of this year. We're still in place to do that, so we hope that we will be able to announce a transformational deal before Christmas of this year, and that'll be highly significant. And that is part of our whole bolt-on acquisition to really bring the revenues up to 30 million, as well as right-sizing Venn to make us profitable. So there will be rapid revenue growth through acquisitions and value arbitrage as we get above the parapet and become re-rated as similar to our peers. So if I go to the next slide, which is really so I'm now moving into the digital engagement platform. So we are building a genomic health database which will capture the highly valuable clinical and genetic data from rare disease patients, and again incorporating a software platform that has AI capability to really interrogate this data. So the objective here is to become the leading broker of EU rare disease patient data. This is in the final development. We've built most of the database. We're now working with Empiric Logic, a Dublin-based innovative software company that has really innovative privacy-preserving protocols that are AI and also AI-enabled platform to really put the finishing edges to this platform. It will be GDPR compliant. It will be pseudonymized for patients. It will be encrypted. We are working with patient advocacy groups and pharma companies to really help us in the final design functionality of this database. And the most interesting thing about this model is that it is a low-cost platform. As I said before, rare disease patients have been through a huge amount of clinical analysis and genomic analysis. So the data we're collecting in the database already pre-exists. It's there. What we're advocating through the advocacy groups is that patients share their data with us. They share this data with us because they can under GDPR rules, because a patient's data is owned by them, and they can decide where that data goes, be it with Open Orphan or with other companies, of course. But we would advocate that they would share with us. We would corral that data. And this data is valuable for pharma companies to really help them discover the genetic basis of certain rare diseases. And that can be the focus for their future research projects for better diagnostics and better treatments for these diseases. In-house artificial intelligence will also allow this platform identify very specific patients for future clinical trials in the evaluation of these new products as they come into the clinical evaluation phase. So the right size of this slide actually tells a little bit more about how it works. So patients will share their data with us, and again, under GDPR, it will all be anonymized in our database. It is the corral aggregate data that is really valuable. We will share that with pharma companies for an access fee, and that's really important that fee is out there. And I'll tell you a little bit about the value of this. But they will drive discovery through this access to this database, and the access fees we get, we will share a component of that back to the advocacy groups, and this is then just really putting the patient very centric into the process of driving this drug discovery for new treatments for rare diseases. In terms of the valuation, we estimate that each patient data set is valued at about 5,000 per data set. We aim to collect 10,000 patient records over the next 2 years. That is 1/3 of 1% of the total population of rare disease patients across Europe. So this is eminently doable. Hopefully we'll go beyond that, but that's the target we set ourselves, and we think that's easily achievable. The value of that nominal database at 10,000 data sets is 50 million. Now that assumes a linear one-to-one pharma access to looking at that data, but in fact, this is a pre-competitive database. So non-exclusive, multiple pharma parties can be looking at this data in parallel. So the value of this actually 10,000 data set is actually many multiples of 50 million. So we're very excited by not only the value of this, but really driving new products that will be the base of what comes out of this database. And that's important because as products come out of this database, there will also be milestone payments for for Open Orphan, and royalty payments on any product that comes out into the marketplace based on this data. So if I get to the next slide, which I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting, Ben, I don't know if you can help me here.
Hang on.
Yeah, so
Just
okay, that's right. The virtual rep. I said I'd talk a little bit about this. It won't be rolled out until later next year, but really this is a digital engagement platform. I talked a little bit about the companies who we're working with to bring their products to Europe. This is a digital engagement platform where those companies can really interact with the key opinion leaders, the physicians across Europe who are prescribing treatments for rare disease patients. That this is a way in which these companies can directly engage with these physicians at a time of their that suits them. It allows for email exchange and dossier exchange, and just telling them a little bit about the products that's coming down the pipeline through our activities within the European infrastructure, the reimbursement infrastructure. And again, the novel thing here is that these products do not exist currently in Europe, so we're not competing against a competitor product. It is a new product for these rare disease patients. So we think this process of engagement with the KOLs is a really efficient way in which to really drive this product going forward. And the next slide, actually, I'm just trying to get that. So again, this is going back to, I told you the precedents in the marketplace really value each patient data set from the genomic health database at 5,000. This slide and the next slide, Ben, if you can get to that, really just declare or show examples of what people are prepared to pay in terms of investment and what people are prepared to pay from an acquisition perspective for access to these data sets. So it just gives you precedence in the marketplace at 5,000 per patient data set. And then the final slide, Ben, if you don't mind. So hopefully I haven't gone too quickly, but there's a lot of information here. I know that, but it really is a compelling investment case. I hope I've convinced you of that. It's a new management team that's a track record of building successful businesses and know and how to get in and out of really exciting opportunities. We have a very clear strategy for growth. We're on the we're in the active discussions with kind of bolt-on acquisition targets. That is kind of a key component of our build in revenue, and then be identified by as an acquisition target. It's the fastest growing market segment of the pharma market. Political support, and this is only the beginning. As you saw, the pipeline of 2,500, it can only grow even faster. And finally, we will generate shareholder returns, dividends within 2 years, and hopefully an acquisition in advance of that. So I think that's the last slide, Ben. So I should stop there, and happy to take questions from any of the listeners. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Maurice. You've given us a great deal of information about the company. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we've been asked a number of questions by people participating in tonight's webinar. So we're going to go back over some of what you've already covered. I think just give us an opportunity just to take our time just to go in to dive a bit deeper into some of your answers. So let's start with the first question that came in from Sai, which I think is a very good one, because at the heart, from what I've understood, at the heart of your model is your ability to go in and take over one of these companies that is trading at a discount relative to peers. So let's say trading at 1 to 1.5 times revenue, and through your expertise and what Open Orphan can bring to the company, you look to improve the acquisition target's business model and look to unleash more value from that. So in that context, could you just go over again for us and just summarize some of the key changes that you've made and are making to Venn Life Sciences?
Yeah, sure, actually, and thanks for that. So really, Venn, it was generating nice revenue, and nothing spectacular, but nice revenue of 14, 15 million over the last few years. Yet it wasn't profitable; it was losing money, and the reason was because it wasn't the right size. It had too many staff. It had staff not doing very much. Staff utilization was at 60%. Most companies in this space had to be at 90% plus. So that was a key object. That was a key reason why they weren't making profits. There was too many staff. The staff weren't rightly corrected, and it wasn't fit for purpose. So that's one of the key things. Also, there was some operational logistics associated with the company. For example, the premises were too big. There's lots of empty space, and so there was a lot of simple things that we're in the process of correcting. And we're at a staff utilization now of 80%. By the end of the year, we hope to be at 90%. 8% plus, and this is why we can guarantee that based on current revenues, and you saw the interim results, we will be profitable in the first half of next year based on our forecast guided revenues for the company. And likewise, we're also in the middle of this acquisition strategy. So once we announce that new acquisition strategy, we believe we'll be fit for purpose with the appropriate staff and with revenues approaching 30 million.
Okay, so I'd just like to pull you up or ask a question personally there on the point you just made. So one of the limitations of AIM is the fact that companies are only required to produce their results twice a year, and those two sets of results come within 3 months of each other. So the interims come within 3 months of the year-end results typically. So for most of the year, investors and shareholders, they'll be flying blind in terms of their understanding of how a company is performing financially. Now, you've obviously made some pretty bold claims about what your expectations are for H1 next year, and you've obviously also spelled out a path to significant increases in revenue. Are you planning on updating the market with more financial numbers as you make progress in making sales?
You're right, Ben, that there is really two announcements, so that can be limiting, and I guess we have to operate within the PLC rules, as everyone knows. I guess what we can do as we announce, acquisition targets and completing such transactions and deals, as much as we can, we will demonstrate we will declare a little bit of the financial drivers within the transaction. So as much as we can, we will, because we want to be as transparent as possible, and that's why you've probably noticed we're very active in engaging with the community. We want to be as open and as transparent as possible, and within the restrictions of which we can do that, we will declare as much as we can. So as much as we can, we will, is the answer to the question.
So in that light, we've had a question here from Tom, which I'll abbreviate slightly. What financial milestones do you hope for the company to achieve over the coming months and years?
Yeah, so I think when we did the reverse takeover, we had declared that we would be 30 million by 2022. We hope we'll get there a little bit faster, but that was a guide. And this acquisition that we hope to announce before Christmas of this year will effectively get us there. So that's effectively what we're saying to the market.
So Charles then has a question, so as a follow-on, which dovetails quite nicely, and he'd like to know, how is it that Open Orphan is able to address this market opportunity, and what's your competitive edge? Why is it no one else can do what you're doing?
Well, I think a lot of people maybe are doing what we're doing, but actually we're very focused on the rare disease space. We have a very active intelligence kind of gathering group within the company who are looking for companies who might be also looking to be acquired, or actually just have a meeting of minds of the different management teams. I remind all the listeners that when we went for our RTO, we had in our prospectus, we had 27 different companies lined up that we had been in discussions with, and had a kind of a heads of terms and agreement that we might possibly do something together. So we have a very active acquisition M&A activity within the company, and that's really kind of that's maybe makes a difference. But I also think we're very focused because we're focused on the rare disease space in the acquisition component. That makes it somewhat easier.
So with respect to the acquisitions, and that's obviously been a key part of the strategy that Open Orphan has described to the market, that this is how you are planning to grow the business. Andrew's asked us, how are you looking to finance these acquisitions?
Yeah, good question. And actually, what I would say is, again, we declared to the market that this is all pure equity. It's a share-for-share exchange with a new company. So there's no real cash transferring as part of the deal. It is a share-for-share exchange. So it's an equity transaction. That's how this will be funded.
And with respect to sales, you talked a bit about the genomic health database, which is your speciality within the business, your special area. You talked in the presentation about the size of the database. Your goal, I believe, is to take it up to 10,000 patient records, which you believe the industry standard valuation is €5,000 per record. You described to us a bit about how this database can be reused, and you can potentially have clients even using it in parallel. Could you talk us through that a bit more and explain how that will impact on sales in the business?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it is a bit complex, but fundamentally, the data is there for whichever pharma company comes to look at the data, and there could be multiple companies looking at the same data at the same time. So it is what we call a pre-competitive space. It's non-exclusive. People are looking at the same data. Whoever maybe finds the genetic variation that is causative of this disease, then they can go off and do a research project that really kind of develops intellectual property for them to really secure that information. So at that point in time, it does become somewhat exclusive. However, when they have access to our database, they're paying for access, and so this linear 50 million valuation is just assuming there would just be one company looking at one record at any one time, whereas in fact the database, we hope, will be being looked at by multiple people at the same time, and so that's the difference. So the valuation is probably multiple numbers of 50 million. And let me be clear. Once a company gets to that point and finds a genetic variation, they then kind of declare that they're using this information. The other companies can maybe decide not to look at it anymore or continue because there may be other genetic deviations or alterations that are causative to the disease or additive to the disease, or also can be used for better diagnosis of the disease. So there's still value in the data that this other company is now kind of taking some of it. And as that company takes that data and derive new products from that, there is milestone payments back to Open Orphan as they bring that product through clinical evaluation, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, regulatory approval. Each of these milestones are between 1 to 5 million at a go, and then we would expect a royalty on the product as it goes onto the market from that company. So there's lots of additional upside that we're not even putting into the financial models or the figures I'm talking to that are hugely additive to Open Orphan. So the valuation at 50 million, like I said, assumes a one-to-one relationship between the data and one company. It's not going to be that. It's going to be multiple companies at the same time, and that's the huge value upside here.
Yeah, so you've obviously described, as you say, the multiple revenue streams coming out from the same source, from the same database. How much? So when you announce a contract to an engagement to the market, how free do you think you'll be able to describe the actual terms of the engagement with a pharmaceutical company and be able to explain very clearly to investors that, well, the specifics of the transaction and how it's put together?
It'll really depend on the customer, the client, actually, what they're happy to declare or not. And as you know, sometimes these deals there's very little declared, and sometimes there's a lot. So it really will depend on our the client who's engaging with us. But typically, I think the value, the precedence in the market, the 5,000 per data set. The usual assessment that once that you get a product coming out of this data that could never have been identified before without this data, then these companies will have more milestone payments and royalties at the end. So that structure is well defined. There's precedence there. So I guess that all the agreements with pharma will be along those terms. Whether we can declare definitive information or not will really come back to the client. So we'll obviously have to respect that, but the investors will see the output of that, I guess, in the revenues that accrue as a result of those transactions.
Okay, so let's talk now a little bit about the construction of the database itself, because there's obviously a lot riding on this for the company. You've set a target of 10,000 patient records. When do you expect to achieve that number?
Yeah, so let me tell you where we're at currently, because I think that's important. So
that's a good place to start.
Yeah, we have been building this since we got our investment of 4.5 million in June. We have the database pretty much built. We announced our collaboration with Empiric Logic, who are putting the final kind of privacy preserving encryption protocols, artificial intelligence on top of that database. And remember, I've worked with Genomics Medicine Ireland before, so I know how to structure these. I know how to make them secure from a patient perspective. So in terms of pseudo-anonymization of the patient's identity, in terms of encryption, so that, no matter what happens, this data is secure. And again, we're hosting different parts of the data, be it patient personal information, clinical information, genomic information, in different locations, all encrypted separately. So the likelihood of anyone, getting in and identifying the patient is very, very low. And then finally, it is kind of GDPR compliant. So we have all the compliant safety requirements in place. We are now in the middle of beta testing, so we're bringing this out to the market in a kind of a limited fashion. We're engaging with advocacy groups, we're engaging with pharma groups who are helping us look at the final touches, design, functionality, and that's happening right now. Now, we hope we will be declaring to the market soon. We have early adopter agreements that we're putting in place with advocacy groups and with pharma companies, and we hope to declare some of those as to how we're getting on within the next few weeks. So that's kind of what I am saying in terms of the rollout. And then once we finish that beta testing, Q1 of next year is when we hope to go live with the database. So that's kind of giving a very definitive outline to the market of when it will be live. That's when we can get our first data upload into the database. We imagine that based on working with the advocacy groups, which are really going to be the marketeers, the people who are making these patients aware of this database, that we will build a data set of 10,000 within the next 2 years. So that's our goal. We hope to better that, but we think that's eminently doable within the next 2 years. And remember, once we have any level of data in there, that is attractive to pharma companies. So we don't have to wait to get to 10,000 to make this an attractive database for companies to interact with. That can happen straight away once data goes into the database.
So it's very interesting, and obviously you've set a key milestone there with, by the sounds of it, quite a lot of news flow that should be associated with that, assuming that things broadly go to plan. So there's quite a lot that investors and the market can expect to hear from you on this over the next sort of coming months. But tell us a bit more about who your competitors are in this space and what makes you stand out for them. That's a question we've had from Harry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of data collection, a lot of people are talking about data and the value of data, and data is valuable. And there's a lot of data brokers out there who are maybe working with different data sets and using them for many purposes, not just drug development or diagnostics, not just rare diseases, but in many different facets in terms of banking, in terms of insurance, many other uses. I guess why we're unique with our data set is that we are a company that is focused. The whole ethos of the company is around rare diseases. We're very motivated by putting the patient a little bit centric here, but we think that's not just a good thing to do. It's a very wise commercial thing to do because that will drive the whole value of the company here. So that's really important. That's unique. There's no rare disease genomic database company who are also bringing products to the market in parallel with this activity. There's no one else doing that. So we're unique in that concept. And I guess the fact that we are recognizing the huge value of the advocacy groups in what they do for these patients, that's unique. No one else is doing that. So I think there's unique aspects to this, but I will be, there is competition in the marketplace. We're confident we can be better than those competitors. And I guess time will tell, but we are very confident that what we're doing in terms of the advocacy groups, in terms of safety, in terms of the credibility we have here within the marketplace, that we're confident we can achieve the 10,000 and beat the competition.
So we've had a very good question from Bob, which I've heard some other private investors have asked and wanted to know. There's obviously an impression out there that pharma stocks can get hurt by regulatory decisions. How much of an issue is this for you, and to what extent is Open Orphan exposed to regulations and the drugs themselves?
Well, regulation, we work within a regulated environment. That's something we live and breathe every day. But the glorious thing about Open Orphan is we're not developing products, and that's what really hurts pharma companies. So it's that binary one of zero. So your product is either successful or fail. So at the clinic, and so if it fails, if you're a startup or a biotech, you're pretty much gone. If you're a pharma company, you might sustain it, but your valuation will be hugely reduced. For us, the products we're bringing, we're adding value to these products for pharma companies. We're not developing our own products. To reiterate, we're a pharma services company. So irrespective of the result, of the outcome of the testing we do, we get paid for that. So we're not a binary risk. We're a services company that gets paid no matter what the result is. So that's the difference here. And I think I know there has been some confusion. So the binary risk is not something that affects us. We get paid. The regulatory environment is something that we have to live with every day, and that's what we're doing. So I mean, that's really currently not an issue, and any regulation that comes in place, there's always a huge amount of upside of time to get ready for that. So there's no surprises from a regulatory perspective that we can cater for in the company.
So what you've done is you've positioned the business as an archetypal supplier of picks and shovels to the next gold rush.
That's exactly right. We are the picks and shovel, and there's a huge gold rush going on right now.
Right, so let's talk a little bit about the market then. David has asked us, so this is David's view, that given that the EU market is so fragmented, why has no one else tried to consolidate like you are trying to do?
I think it's a good question. I think the fact that the orphan space is just now really becoming kind of obvious to a lot of different customers. No one's really focused on it, so we have stolen a march here a little bit, first to market, if you will. There's nothing to say that other companies can't do this, but the fact that we have this franchise now in the orphan space means that for the bigger consulting houses who do this for a living, they're mainly focused on complex diseases. They're mainly focused in the cancers of this world. So they don't have a franchise in the orphan space. So the IQVIAs, the Parexels, the Icons, we come above the parapet of 30 million. They will look to this as a way in which they can get into the orphan space very quickly with the infrastructure and the pan-European operations we're putting in place. So the question is valid in that there is a lot of people could have done this. I guess we're in a good place, a little bit ahead of the curve. So that's the opportunity we have.
So I'm a bit hesitant to ask the next question because it's bringing up the dreaded B word, but I'll go for it anyway. So Andrew's asked us, is there any risk to your EU consulting model in the event of a disorderly Brexit? And apologies for bringing Brexit up. Are there any passporting issues relating to the UK's current membership of the EU in your particular space?
Obviously, everyone is aware of Brexit. And I mean, I guess from our perspective, is this the regulatory environment we just talked about 2 questions ago. That will continue. Once Brexit happens, orderly or disorderly. So in fact, that's there to safeguard the supply of medicines, which we've all heard about, the supply, the regulation. Imports across borders might get a little bit trickier, but I guess that's a supply chain issue. But in terms of the regulations you have to go through, that won't change unless there's going to be a lot of notice for that. So there's time to prepare. So Brexit from a delivering new services, new products from a concept of the orphan drug genomic database, I don't see it as an issue. In terms of the supply chain, that may become an issue. And again, that's not something we do. That's what the pharma companies do. So the business we're in is actually somewhat isolated because it is controlled by a regulatory environment, not a borders customs environment. So a little bit immune, but who knows? Brexit has been the surprise all the way along.
Yeah, just a bit again. So David's asked us another question to follow on from that. I think you've already answered this, but let's just recap slightly. So in his words, on the database side of things, obviously referring to the genomic health database, are you planning on any more acquisitions? So I think what David's asking there is that the opportunity to increase your patient record set through acquisition, or are you going to follow the strategy that you described to us through the engagement with the patient advocacy groups and other sources?
Yeah, it is a very good question, and I guess if there are ways that kind of allow us add to our database content faster, that is something we will absolutely look at. There are some rare disease patient database out there. Some are public, some are private, and you're probably aware of Genome England. Has a huge clinical practice now in rare diseases, so that's actually hugely valuable in terms of the fact that an awful lot of people with a rare disease in England are getting this clinical genomic service, and again, that data can come to us hopefully through the patient under GDPR. So I guess this is something we've thought about, and we're aware of the other kind of content that we could look to bolster onto our database, and that's something we'll constantly review. It's a really good question, and hopefully we may have an update there at some point. But yeah, anything that adds to the content of the database is something we're constantly thinking about.
Okay, so let's go back and look at the overall size of the opportunity in front of us now. Bob's asked us, and you did deal with this early on in the presentation, but again, I think it'd be helpful just to have a recap. Bob's asked, can you tell me more about the orphan drug sector, and more specifically, what is the size of the opportunity now?
Yeah, well, I guess if we go back to slide 3, I think it is. If you can, yeah.
Here we go.
No, down one or two more. One there, here. So
Mm-hmm.
this shows the consulting. The pharma consulting market in the US. This is just the consulting market based on the orphan drug sector is worth 9.9 billion. So that's a market we're in. That doesn't tell us about the value of the products, the drug products that are coming out in the orphan space. This is more just the business that we're operating in terms of the consulting. So it's a huge market. If the second point on the top of the slide, 58% of all the drugs being approved by the US regulators last year were orphan products. This is the fastest growing segment of the market. So we're in a fast growing market with a huge consulting arm associated with that. The figures are enormous, and the value of these drugs are enormous, especially the cost to supply them. So hopefully that answers the question. We're in a growth market. We're in a very huge pipeline of products coming through, 2,500. So I can't give figures, but we're in a very active growth market, and I guess that's where I'll finish that question, if that's enough.
So just to build on that point, so in the presentation, you did actually deal with the point that we've actually just about to ask. So Kia's asked us, how does the EU market differ from the US market? And one of the things that I noted down, you said that in the US there are roughly 500 orphan drugs on the market, whereas in Europe there are 180. So do you want to just tell us a bit more, just speak a bit more to the opportunity that you see there, potentially bringing over some of the drugs over to Europe?
Yeah, that is a huge part of our business model to grow. Obviously, we were growing by strategic acquisitions, but also to grow that business endemically, organically within the company. It is a huge opportunity. The reason why those American products are not in Europe is because reimbursement in Europe is very complex. So let me be clear. In the US, reimbursement is once you get your regulatory approval, that's the FDA approval of your orphan product. There's 3 different payers who pay for these drugs once they're prescribed in the US. So that's actually very clear, and it happens within pretty much overnight once you get the regulatory approval. In Europe, if a product gets regulatory approval in Europe by the EMA, so that is a pan-European regulatory environment, so the regulation is pretty straightforward, but it's the reimbursement that's complex. So for example, in the UK, there is NICE in England, there's the Welsh and Scottish authorities, 3 different agencies you have to get through to get the United Kingdom market. France is 14 different agencies. In Italy, there's 45. In Germany, there's 10, the major markets. So the US companies who are very focused on the US market don't have the bandwidth, the expertise to really navigate the European reimbursement process. We do, and so that's the difference. We say to these companies, we will be your pan-European consulting house that will bring your products to the major European markets and navigate the reimbursement process that is complex. We have credibility in that. We've done it before through our consulting houses, so we know the process to undertake to get the reimbursement in place. And remember, these are rare disease orphan products that are not on the European market. There's no comparator here. There's no precedent product. So getting a first product to these patients in Europe is a little bit easier from a reimbursement perspective, as long as you know what criteria, pharmacoeconomic criteria you have to put in the dossier. So that's actually the reason why there's a disparity. But like I said, that disparity is our huge opportunity.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about the virtual rep platform. Now, you obviously did tell us in the presentation that was an area that you weren't going to focus on so much, but we've had a couple of questions through from Eddie and from Charles, which are broadly the same. And they've asked if you could tell us a bit more about the AI that you're planning to adopt next year when we release the virtual rep platform.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about it, but I guess the reason why won't be rolled out till next year is because of just what I answered in the last question, those 320 products that are not in Europe but are in the US, as they slowly come through the regulatory process, because that takes 9 months to a year. That's when this kind of virtual rep digital platform will need to be engaged. So those companies that were bringing their products to Europe, this is a way in which they can warm up the market or make the market aware that their products are now going to be available in Europe for the first time ever. So this is a way in which they can engage in a virtual IT process to engage with the KOLs, the physicians who are prescribing these drugs, these new drugs for patients in Europe. So it is in a very efficient way to get that connection between the pharma company and the doctors, instead of having your sales reps driving around in cars really doing the promotional that way. This is like the Facebook sales rep edition of doing that. The AI actually, that's actually more sits on top of this, and that this allows, for example, the pharma companies to identify those clinicians who are active in their space. So if it's a certain rare disease, it'll identify very specifically those clinicians that are operating, let's say, in Brugada's disease, which is abnormal clinical electrical clinical conductivity in the heart. It will identify the clinicians across Europe in our database that are in that space. So that's an example of what the AI will do. It'll direct the pharma company specifically to those very specific physicians or doctors. So that's one component. The second component is that as these companies go through this, we hope at some point in time that this virtual rep will also have a segue into the genomics platform. It can identify patients that might be appropriate for upcoming clinical trials. So it's a way of engagement of pharma companies with patient population to make them aware of clinical trials that they might like to get involved in going forward. So there's kind of a huge upside between the virtual rep at a point in time when it's in place and can segue with the genomic platform. So the two platforms at a point in time in the future will become mutually beneficial to each other. So that's something I didn't mention before, but that is something we will look to build into the end of next year. Hopefully that answered the question, because it is a very good question.
And obviously, I guess you expect to update the market more about this as you come nearer to launching, and sort of explain more about sort of anticipated costs and more about the plans for deployment.
Absolutely, we will be doing that for sure.
Good. Well, you've spoken very comprehensively about the company this evening. So Els asked us if you could just tell us a bit more about your previous experience, Maurice.
Oh, okay. I'm a scientist. I mean, my whole career has been based in looking at. I'm a pharmaceutical sciences expert, molecular genetics. So really trying to understand the genetics of all types of diseases, complex disease, oncology, and rare diseases now. And rare disease is probably the one that is probably ignored for so long. So I'm very passionate about really driving future research in this. So that's what my whole career has been in. I've worked in pharmaceutical companies. I've brought products to market through the research and clinical evaluation. I've set up 3 companies, all in the genomic space. One was a chemistry around how to detect variations in the genome. The second one was Genomics Medicine Ireland, which was really to genetically identify 10% of the Irish patient population to drive better diagnosis and treatments for complex disease. As you know, that was acquired by WuXi NextCode last year for a figure undisclosed, but after 400 million investment into the company. And then finally, Open Orphan. So, I mean, a scientist that's intrigued by treatments for disease and making patients' lives better. So that's always been my mantra. And hopefully we can do something really significant here.
So that actually brings us very nicely to what I think is going to be our final question, which has been asked by Keir, and it's the last question at the bottom here. Obviously, everybody listening into this call, they're here as either shareholders or potential shareholders in the company. So we obviously want to understand more about the upside that might be on offer here at Open Orphan. Now, one of the numbers that the company has promoted a lot is the potential discrepancy between the current valuation based on revenue and how your competitors are valued. In fact, shall we actually just jump to that slide?
Yeah.
So this is about healthcare data. Sorry. So why don't you tell us about why you believe the company is undervalued and what you believe will help drive the market valuation over the coming 12 months?
A few reasons. I think one of the reasons is history. We have been associated with Venn that was disappointing to the market, and while it had interesting revenues, it had really bad valuation and never was profit making. So, I mean, I guess that history is going to be there. The history will always be there, but hopefully, as time evolves and we demonstrate to the market that we are making right sizing Venn, we are correcting, we are building by acquisition, that distance will grow. And as we strategically build through bolt-ons, and we get our revenue above 30 million, I believe that re-rating will happen. And when I talk about the re-rating in this kind of consulting, high-end consulting clinical evaluation space, most of our peers are valued at 2.5 to 3 times revenue. So if we're at 30 million revenues, we should be at 60 million plus valuation. So that's just an example. We hope by doing the things that I've talked about over the last 45 minutes, that will demonstrate that we are doing all those things, that we should be re-rated to be 2.5, 3 times revenue. And that's what we're aiming to do.
Excellent. Well, look, Maurice, thank you very much for your time this evening, and for giving us such an incisive view of the company and the future. It certainly sounds like you have a huge amount on your plate, and there will be a lot of news flow coming over the coming months.
Thank you, Ben, and I actually just want to say thank you to the listeners. Hopefully, I have given some clarity, and like Cathal and I said, we're out there trying to describe the story as much as possible. So happy to give updates when and if appropriate.
Fantastic. So this will bring the event now to an end. The event will be published on Value the Markets tomorrow, promoted across social media. Thank you very much to everybody for listening in, and thank you also for the excellent questions. Maurice, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.